Okay, good morning. My name is Carlock Yip. I'm very happy to present to you today a section of a paper that I've just published with Journal of Critical Realism. It's the first time I publish with this journal, and I'm very worried about using the word happy, to share, things that have got to do with a lot of death and destruction and so on. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, it's an occasion that I do so. Um, I wanted to look at so the structure of this session is that it would be divided into 2 hours. In the first hour, Andreas and myself would do our presentation, and then in the next hour, Margaret and Andrea would and Angela would do their presentation, and each hour would end with some discussion, so that things is still fresh on people's minds. In this presentation of mine, I'd like to talk a little bit about the idea of freedom or agency in war. And this comes about because of my own research. My home discipline is international law, and I specialize in the laws related to armed conflicts. And over the years, I have kind of looked into different traditions or different approaches to the idea of, there being some freedom or some agency on the part of the human individuals involved in armed conflicts. And I thought that maybe it'd be an interesting comparison to look into the sort of commonalities or divergences among these different perspectives. The person is, yes, okay, so it's a little bit. So I want to start with Anthony Giddens, very often the object of critique in in some critical realist literature. So he had the idea that even people in solitary confinement have freedom, have agency. Why? Because they can go on
Who said that?
I'm sorry. Hello. Excuse me, sir. What's happening? Right. So, so in Gittens' view, even people in solitary confinement, I wonder, Andres, if you can tell. So even people in solitary confinement have freedom, have agency. They can go on hunger strike. They can commit suicide in order to refuse submission or controlled by the external circumstances. John Thompson, critiqued this idea of agency as being defined in a way that the person could have done other. So the reason why Gittens felt that there is still agency, still freedom in this situation is because he used the definition of agency as somebody who could have done otherwise than as determined by the world. And John Thompson critiqued this definition as trying to preserve the complementarity between structure and agency only by defining agency in such a way that any individual in any situation could not be an agent. And this is, of course, a critique that was endorsed by Margaret Archer. But I sometimes think that perhaps Gittens' idea or example really was inspired, at least partly, by Sartre. And I cannot go to the next slide. Who obviously, talked a lot about war, being kind of like a war philosopher, if you like, sort of through the existential experience in the Second World War. So he talked about torture, and his famous ideas were that, even the red hot pincers of the torturer do not exempt us from being free. The freedom of the tortured person is a freedom which struggles against the expanding of the flesh and which finally freely chooses to be submerged in the flesh. The purpose of the torture is to force this freedom freely to identify itself with the tortured flesh. And I wanted to maybe give a minute to the images here, which are taken from the current genocide in Gaza, and perhaps also partly in response to the appeal by Professor Alderson last year in Warwick that we need to engage with the sort of social issues of our time. So these are, the things that are happening as we speak. And that is the view of Sartre of freedom of the tortured. And why is it? So this is the existential idea of freedom that exists also in war because it comes with the human existence. That is that the human person can not be free. That is, it is condemned to be free. We are not free to cease being free. This is the radical existential idea of freedom. Coming back a little bit to the real world in which I operate, legal responsibility and by implication agency for an aggressive war falls on the states or political leaders at the highest level. And the individual soldiers are immune so long as they comply with international humanitarian law. That is, for instance, no targeting of civilians. And I got an image here of the individual soldier of the Russian armed forces invading Ukraine. And amongst us, we got Ukrainians here. So this is the situation that the law doesn't actually recognize agency on the part of the individuals who are fighting in an aggressive war so long as they fulfill certain minimal obligations in war. And the objections to that legal position, that is, individuals have no agency, no freedom, and therefore no responsibility for merely participating in a war, of course met with objection by the existentialists. Sartre said that there are no accidents in a life. A community event which suddenly bursts forth and involves me in it doesn't come from the outside. If I'm mobilized in a war, this war is my war. It is in my image and I deserve it. I deserve it first because I could always get out of it by suicide or by desertion. For the lack of getting out of it, I have chosen it. This can be due to inertia, to cowardice in the face of public opinion, or because I prefer certain other values to the value of refusal to join in the war, the good opinion of my relatives, the honor of my family, etc. Any way you look at it, it is a matter of choice. In war, there are no innocent victims. If therefore I've preferred war to death or to dishonor, everything takes place as if I bore the entire responsibility for this war. For it depended on me that for me and by me this war should not exist, and I have decided that it does exist. So this is the existential objection to the legal idea or the idea that, individuals are just, cog in a machine and they don't have freedom and agency and so on. In the perhaps somewhat related area of analytic philosophy, there are some theorists, we call them revisionist just war theorists, who also objected to the current view or vision of individual responsibility or agency in war. And they basically hold the view that all individuals, including foot soldiers, are responsible for the war they participate in per se. And if the war is an aggressive one, they bear individual moral and according to some criminal responsibility. Now let us look at the critical realist perspective. And I draw here particularly on Margaret Archer's work and her critique of Anthony Giddens' idea of agency. She said that the Giddensian agency as the ability to do otherwise predicates on an understratified concept of action. To do something is about action. That doesn't distinguish between different degrees of voluntariness or embeddedness, therefore falling into central conflation. So as an answer, she developed her own definition of agency, which is the ability to make a difference. So we're no longer talking about action, but simply making a difference or being, if you like. That would include mere membership in a collectivity with morphological implications. It doesn't require an action, but it captures a wider variety of freedom and agency. And I've used these slides here because what that definition does is to say it's not really just the people who are, for instance, pressing a buttons to, attack certain sports in Gaza, but people who are investing in all of these companies, Barclays, Amazon, Microsoft, Volvo, Airbnb, all these household names that we are using every day in our life, we are participating in what Francesca Albanese called the economy of genocide. And this is what Margaret Archer was saying, that we are not really necessarily able to do otherwise. I am speaking to the slides that is run on a program provided by Microsoft. So it's not so easy for me to be able to do otherwise in this presentation unless I draw a picture. But nonetheless, I bear responsibility. I have made a difference by my membership in a collectivity of subscribers in Microsoft with morphological implications. So this is the Archerian concept of the agency in war and freedom in war. Hannah Arendt drew a comparable distinction between guilt and responsibility. Guilt always singling out individuals for acts done, that is action, while the latter including political responsibility that arise by mere virtue of one's collective group membership. But I wanted to argue that the Archerian objection here or critique here is primarily methodological in nature. And I want to make that point because I want to draw some synergy between the very radical existential notion of freedom and the Bhaskarian materialist idea of agency. So existential freedom has its most valuable function, perhaps not in enabling social analysis, but in awakening in each individual directly their most radical form of freedom, even in the most constraining circumstances, such as war. And Bhaskar's materialist approach of positioning ourselves back into the internality of the world as a participant rather than as an external perceiver or investigator certainly has some resonance to what I have found in the existential literature. And this also echoes what Marx said, that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. And how exactly do they align, or what are the points of synergy? And I want to look at this in a little bit more detail. Both existential phenomenology and Bhaskar's materiality adopt freedom from a first-person perspective. Sartre said that the historicity of society doesn't stem simply from the fact that they have a past, but from the fact that they reassume the past by making it a memorial. So this is another radical notion of freedom, that you can just get rid of your past and you just live in the present. There is a similar idea in Bhaskar's materiality when he said the freedoms aspiration is to live in and only in present moment awareness. You may take the jewels of experience from the past and you may make plans for the future, but they are already therefore built into the present and you live it without regret or worry. A second point of contact or synergy or similarity is the inter or intra-connected nature of our freedom. Sartre said that none is free until we're all free. Simone de Beauvoir said that to will oneself free is also to will others free. Bhaskar said, as we are all interconnected and inseparably intertwined at the ground state, our freedom will be constrained if any being is unfree anywhere in the world. The third point of synergy that I see is the idea of self-witnessing, which is perhaps sometimes not very explicit in the existential phenomenological literature, but a lot of people try, make comparison between the two. So Sartre said that liberating the exercise of a human being's freedom to realize that being is a project of continued distancing, negation, and annihilation of the being in itself as objective presence, that is the ontic, in order to affirm the being for itself as subjective existence, that is the ontological. In other words, human determines its being by means of being which it is not, that is the being in itself. And freedom is precisely the being which makes itself a lack of being, that is the being for itself. So in his famous book, Nothing, Being and Nothingness, Sartre basically made the point that it is by virtue of our nothingness that we come into being. There is a similar strand of thought in Bhaskar's Meta-Reality when he took the view that witnessing one's own conscious activity as distinct from the consciousness of the embodied personality is the path to the non-dual ground state where the transcendental real self is realized. All of these procedures require a certain amount of self-witnessing to reflect on yourself. In the theme of Archer's reflexivity also, that ultimately gives us freedom. And I find this useful in war and to contemplate the theme of freedom in war because of something that I think I would end this presentation with. And this is a quote by Felicien Tagengwa, who is a Rwandan survivor of the Rwandan genocide in 1994. And this saying or this quote appears in many memorial places in Rwanda today. And it says, if you knew me and you really knew yourself, you wouldn't have killed me. So this is going back to the idea that if you really do your self-witnessing and you realize your existential freedom from a first-person perspective, we could really have a lot of radical potential in changing the world and not just interpreting it. So this is the end of my presentation. I invite Andreas to do his presentation. Thank you.
Do we have the PowerPoint?
I'm a housemaid. Housemaids must be invisible. That's essential to our profession. The food must be cooked. Meals must appear on the table. The dishes must be washed. The house cleaned. The children prepared for school in the morning. Who does it? No one. The invisible housemaid. If, while serving at the table, I hear a conversation about something that I have an opinion on, I must shut up. Besides being invisible, I must be mute. And deaf. I never hear my employers talking. In the afternoon, when we were rehearsing, a man came to me and showed me where I should stand or move for the lights to illuminate me better, so that I would be seen by all the spectators. Another man hung a small microphone on my dress to make my voice be heard throughout the theater. For the first time in my life, people were busy, making me visible, making me audible. In the evening, wonder of wonders. The family I work for were all there, seeing my body, listening to my voice, understanding my thoughts, my feelings. They were there in the audience. They were silent in the dark. I cried when I came to the dressing room and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman. For the first time in my life, I saw a woman in the mirror. Before looking at the mirror, I used to see a housemaid. Tonight, I saw a woman. I am a woman. This is the real story of Mary, a housemaid who participated in a Theatre of the Oppressed group in Brazil. And I think that it encapsulates the crux of what the Theatre of the Oppressed is. Here you can see Augusto Boal in one of his activities. He was a Brazilian director and playwright. Of course, he was influenced by Paulo Freire and the pedagogy of the oppressed. And I think that this story says a lot about the theater of the oppressed and primarily the humanism that we see both in Freire and Boal, right? It's a process of rehumanization, right? A critique of dehumanization and subhumanism. The main idea of the theater of the oppressed is that Boal attempted to criticize the distinction between the spectator, who is in the audience and is passive, and the actor, who is active. For that reason, he introduced several techniques. I won't analyze all of them. Image theater, forum theater, newspaper theater, legislative theater, and invisible theater. The most popular of these forms is called forum theater. But what is a forum theater? It's a theatrical act prepared by professional actors, amateur actors, or in general, members of a theater of the oppressed group that is repeated several times and the audience participate in all the next endeavors. The idea is that reality is not static, but there are several alternatives to it. And they're usually used together, but forum theater is the most popular. There are several variations of this, but the central idea is that there are no spectators, right? And all of these approaches address oppression in a way or another. So I think that critical realism is now in a dialogical zeitgeist. There are dialogues with other approaches like phenomenology, Bourdieu, integral theory, Nordic eco-philosophy, and other approaches as well. And this year I had the opportunity to use the theater of the oppressed in Lillehammer in Norway. And for that, I would like to thank Lee Price and the Crisis Research Center there. So the question that I wanted to ask is, what happens if we try to extend this dialogue beyond philosophy and the social sciences to a theatrical approach? And what can we learn from each other, practitioners of the theater of the oppressed and people interested in critical realism, from the successes, the failures, and the challenges that these bodies of knowledge have encountered? So I think that there are for me, there are 4 thematic areas through which we can think of the relationship between these 2 forms of knowledge. The one is what I would describe as totalistic metacritiques. And by that, I mean that both are interested in criticizing the entire philosophical and theatrical tradition. When it comes to critical realism, we know the critiques of the epistemic fallacy and the neglect of absence as the primordial failings of Western philosophy. But I would like to focus more on the theater of the oppressed that is not that popular. Boal criticizes Aristotle, Hegel, and Brecht and their influence on theater. He suggests that the Aristotelian poetics is influential today in the way we do arts in general and theater in specific. So let's start with the Aristotelian definition of tragedy that was to be so influential. Aristotle defined tragedy as an act that is serious, complete, and of a great magnitude. It provokes emotions of pity and fear, and it leads to emotional catharsis. From an emancipatory perspective, there are several problems with this. The first is that usually in tragedies, we see the restoration to normality. There is the return to normal. For instance, Prometheus steals the fire, gives it to human, then he's punished by the gods, right? This is a common theme in most ancient tragedies. From an emancipatory perspective, this is problematic, right? Any disruptive, antisocial element at the end of a tragedy is eliminated somehow. Another problem is that if we define theater as acts of great magnitude, that means that people, ordinary people, are excluded, right? We are talking about extraordinary acts performed by extraordinary people. Demigods like Prometheus, rulers like Oedipus, or members of the royal family like Hamlet. But in the theater of the oppressed, we are interested in the stories of Mary, the housemaid, right? Not only in influential people. That, of course, Boal described this as a powerful, coercive system of intimidation, because the effect of a play, of a tragedy, is to create emotions of pity and fear to the audience. Pity for the tragedy of the tragic hero, and fear that this might happen to me or to anybody else as well. This already creates a power inequality, right? The spectator delegates the power to act to the actor. And a third problem is that there are also multiple layers of oppression. It's not just the spectator and the actor, but within the actors, there are hierarchical inequalities. For instance, the chorus and the protagonist. The chorus was composed of 12 to 15 performers, but they were only there to comment on the action of the protagonist. So they had a more passive role. So there are internal contradictions within actors as well. So I was thinking about the overlap with critical realism, and I think that both forms of knowledge seem to have a cosmohistorical significance. They emerged in the 70s. Critical realism as the end of ontological science and epistemic fallacy, and a Copernican revolution in philosophy. And the theater of the oppressed as what Boal would describe as the emancipation of the spect actor. Boal was using this neologism of spect actor, right? He was not accepting the word spectator. So I think that it's extremely difficult, if not impossible, to understand the influence of these approaches without a deep knowledge of the entire history that has preceded them. I think that we also have to understand the specific socioeconomic and historical context in which these approaches emerged. And I think that I have to refer to the crisis of the socialist left. For Bhaskar, we know that he was interested in politics. Several of his friends were in the Labour Party. And he saw critical realism as a renewed argument for socialism, a way to reappropriate reality in times when it was used in problematic ways or dismissed. Augusto Boal also participated in politics in Rio de Janeiro. And I think that we have to see the theater of the oppressed as a formal critique of the Brazilian Communist Party, and in particular, the undemocratic structure of the Brazilian Communist Party, at least if we compare it with the horizontal participatory way through which the theater of the oppressed works. And also as when it comes to the inability of the Brazilian Communist Party to predict the military dictatorship and offer a solution, like an alternative to that. But I think that the theater of the oppressed is better seen as a moment and a method of critical pedagogies in Latin America in general. not only Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, but liberation theology, liberation psychology, participatory action research that was developed by the Colombian scholar Fals Borda, and all other approaches that, successfully or not, but they try to overcome the oppressive contradictions that we see in all social relations, theater, research, pedagogy, etc. So the theater of the oppressed is, Boal would say that it's not the revolution, but it's a rehearsal for the revolution. Why? Because spectators have the power to experiment with solutions on the stage. So another component I would add is that we need to understand the predicaments and the failures of the socialist left to have a deeper understanding of both approaches. Also, they are both part of the dialectical tradition. I would use the word here, I would make the distinction between dialectical theater and dramatic theater. What we see in dramatic theater that is dominant is subjects that are autonomous, that are free. Right? They are not conceived dialectically as both objects, subjects, and objects of social conditions. Theater of the oppressed is a dialectical method, but what you usually see in forum theaters is rather the dominance of dramatic theater, which is a contradiction. For instance, when we use the theater of the oppressed and the spectator intervenes, and we want to discuss, for instance, domestic violence, and the spectator takes the position of an actor, a woman, for instance, who experiences domestic violence and just chooses to abandon the house and leave her husband. This does not capture the complexity when we make decisions in the real society, right? It's a form of abstract heroism where the fault is on the oppressed to act. When it comes to dialectics and critical realism, so this is a failure of the theater of the oppressed in the way that it's implemented. There is a kind of moralization of politics. We maintain the distinction between the oppressed and the oppressor, but it's a bit moralized, where the oppressor is an impossibly evil caricature, and the oppressed always have a choice. So we need a more dialectical dramaturgy. When it comes to critical realism, Nori also suggests that it's only a mild overstatement to describe dialectical critical realism as the forgotten term in Bhaskars's work, a squeeze between the two standpoints. Absence in general, that is a concept important in dialectical critical realism. I was reading this wonderful book. It's a very good introduction to absence. Kant does not refer to Bhaskar, but he gives several examples from Japan, China, and other philosophies of the Far East. And he also says that even like Western thinkers like Heidegger and Derrida, they try to criticize the metaphysics of presence, but they are still limited, right? They are still constrained by Western thinking to a certain extent. So the crisis of dialectics, I think, is another milestone that we have to think about. And the last, I think the last theme, the last thematic category I would like to address is popularization. Here we see the website of the Roy Bhaskar Center. It says that it's philosophy for the many, not the few. Augusto Boal would also say in an ironic and humorous way that everybody can do theater, even actors themselves. Also, we can say that everybody can do philosophy, everybody can do critical realism, even critical realists, right? He was saying this to criticize the hyperspecialization and the problems it creates. Critical realism is becoming more and more popular, right? We have workshops, interviews, podcasts. We know that there are more and more people who download articles from the Journal of Critical Realism. Theater of the oppressed is probably the most, or one of the most popular theatrical approaches all over the world. It has been implemented to themes like racism, poverty. Boal used it, he primarily worked in favelas, in local communities. I think that popularization is a double-edged sword, but I think that we shouldn't reject it per se. On the one hand, I think that all emancipatory philosophies or theatrical approaches, right, they have to be accessible to more and more people. On the other hand, I think that there are problems, for instance, the mechanics of cooptation. When these approaches are made accessible, they usually lose their revolutionary radical core. And another problem is dogmatic metaphysics. And by that, I refer to the tendency to understand these approaches as static, not as in a constant flux, right? Not as breathing, living systems of interrelated categories. Boal understood this problem, and Paulo Freire as well. And he made a distinction that I think it might be important to critical realism as well. For instance, when it comes to the political diversity in critical realism and how we can stretch it. Boal was very skeptical when the theater of the oppressed was used by people who work at human resources departments, for instance, to address conflicts between employers and employees. He made the distinction between creative heresies and unforgivable betrayals, saying that this is an unforgivable betrayal because it neglects all the philosophical and political background of the theater of the oppressed. But as these forms of knowledge become popular, that doesn't mean that they are equally accessible to all. Moltz, in a book that is about meta theory, integral theory, and critical realism, asked this question: why are not, for instance, so many people from the global south interested in meta theory or other social categories? And Todd, an indigenous feminist thinker, she introduced the concept of a citational rebellion, suggesting that we have to engage with the entire spectrum of human thought, not with some specific social categories only. And to conclude, as somebody who is interested in critical realism and the theater of the oppressed, I think that when we practice the theater of the oppressed, we miss what we describe as meta-level epistemic reflexivity. There is a lot of reflexivity about what's going on in a theater of the oppressed group, but usually it stays at the level of individual experience. Freire was critical of this misapplication of his own approach, saying that the pedagogy of the oppressed is not a celebration of individual experience, and we cannot stay at this level. So I think that a meta-level epistemic reflexivity of what's going on in the theater of the oppressed group would be very interested. As somebody who is interested in theater as well, I think that the philosophical discourse sometimes tends to be disembodied. It does not engage with aesthetic sensory experiences that much. This is also a limitation. So I think that on the one hand, the intellectualization of being that we find in the philosophical discourse, and on the other hand, the aestheticization of being that we find in aesthetic mediums like theater or arts, they all have limitations. Thank you.
So we've now got 20 minutes for discussion before the next hour of presentation. If somebody could maybe hand him the mic so that the online.
Thank you. My name is Junso Huang, and I have a question to Kellogg Ip about freedom. So I'm thinking about a case of victims in war, for example, like sex slavery. Victims of sex slavery tend to claim that they were deprived of their freedom to choose or not to get involved in war. And how would your view inform this debate? Because usually on the other side, for example, defendants of war criminals, they tend to argue that these victims of sex slavery were actually actively involved or chose to, support military soldiers. So how would you navigate this debate?
Thank you very much indeed. I think that if you take the existentialist view, they would say, if you are held by your enemy, armed forces as a sex slave, then it's basically sexual slavery or, sexual kind of assault during wartime is kind of like a torture. So the existentialists would say, or maybe we go from Gittins first. I mean, Gittins would say, well, go on a hunger strike, commit suicide, you've got your freedom. You can resist external control. You can resist submission. You could have done otherwise. And then the existentialists would probably take a similar in the early Sartre would say, yeah, well, nothing, you're condemned to be free. in the worst scenario, you commit suicide. But of course, that is, from a third person perspective, the Archerian approach would be saying, well, but you're defining agency or freedom in a way that you cannot not have freedom. So she's kind of like basically agreeing without perhaps approving the idea that human beings are condemned to be free. So she would take the view, along with Hannah Arendt, to say, okay, well, you need to look at the circumstances of the person, what kind of structural constraints, cultural constraints, and so on, to see, what exactly is, how is the agency situated in order to work out, what sort of agency or therefore responsibility we could impose or attribute to a person. My points of view, or sort of looking at some of the meta-reality writing from Bhaskar and sort of thinking a little bit more about the existential writing, is that there is a point in saying that there is always a freedom in the person, who is even, in this horrendous situation of sexual slavery, to choose how to react to that situation. So this is Rollo May saying that this is very often attributed to Viktor Frankl, but apparently it's from Rollo May, the existential psychologist, that between an action and a reaction, there is a pause or a second. That's where your freedom lies. So that would be my reflection on that situation. But of course, one mustn't forget, the third person perspective. That is that, there are a lot of structural constraints or a lot of cultural constraints that created this situation, that unless you remove them, you're really relying on that pause between the action and the reaction of a single individual. So, yeah, thank you.
We can't hear online. We can't hear the question.
All right, sorry. Should be able to hear now, I guess. So I was thanking the presenters. So a comment about freedom. Maybe it helps to see freedom. It helps to understand it, at least at some level, in terms of flourishing, instead of this more binary notion, you're free or you're not free. So the notion of flourishing would bring some graduation to it, and it would also bring in the necessary social conditions or obstacles, so yeah, that would be one comment. And a question to Andreas. So one question about, you mentioned dialectical theater as distinct from, or the dialectical school of theater as distinct from dramatic school. What is dialectical about the dialectical school? That's my question, and this is a real question. I really don't know. So you had a quote from Ellen Norrie, characterizing dialectic as a stop between two standpoints. What are those two standpoints? I didn't catch that. Thank you.
I totally agree with you. Definitely, human flourishing would bring a lot more content and depth to the idea of freedom. I totally agree with you.
So I think that what Norrie refers to is the two standpoints between, he means original critical realism and the spiritual term. And by that, the way I understand is that on the one hand, original critical realism enjoys a wider acceptance to a certain extent. And the fact that he moved too quickly by writing 2 books, Dialectic, The Pulse of Freedom, and Plato, etc. And then he moved too quickly to the spiritual turn that caught a lot of attention, whether somebody agreed with that or not, but there was a lot of discussion about that. So dialectics kind of was a squeeze between these 2 standpoints. This is what I understand from Nori. So the difference between dialectic theater and dramatic theater. I think that one important moment in dialectic theater is Bertolt Brecht's epic theater. What Brecht wanted to do is they all criticize Aristotle and to a certain extent Stanislavski and Boal and Brecht because of the emotional absorption of the audience. Brecht didn't want this, right? He wanted to focus more on critical thinking, right? We don't want the audience to be just emotionally immersed in what's going on. So Brecht would introduce techniques like his actors would say, "I'm an actor. Don't be immersed. You know, I'm an actor," focusing on critical thinking. This can introduce another dualism between critical thinking and emotion that can be also problematic. But the way I understand, so dramatic theater has this element, emotional immersion, and another element is there is the idea of free, autonomous subjects, that they are not constrained by any cultural, or for instance, the example of the woman that I gave. It's forum theater, but still it shows a woman that can just abandon the house. Dialectical theater focuses on conflicts. Either there is usually a general will in the play, a general theme that is in conflict with the different characters. There are internal conflicts. For instance, we can see that in Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, when he says to be or not to be, right? He's indecisive, right? There is an internal conflict. This is dialectics. And also there is dialectical conflicts between the characters. So I would say for me, these are the main differences between dialectical theater and dramatic.
Can the online people be remembered, please, as well?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Is there anybody online who would like to say anything?
Yes, please. Can I speak?
Yes.
Thank you. First of all, thank you. It's such a joy to hear 2 people really thinking deeply about critical realism and how to apply it. It was such a pleasure to listen to both of your clear, thoughtful, deep talks. At the moment, as you may know, there's been a new party starting up in Britain, the New Socialist Party, and there's a big debate going on as to whether it should go to be a traditional parliamentary party, which will be very limited in its scope, or to be a great social movement to change society, but which will be in some ways weaker than if it goes through the legal government channels. And the theatre of the oppressed work and your thinking about what autonomy means and agency, it's just so useful. And I hope that you will carry on with your work of philosophy of the many, not the few, and negotiate with some of these people to deepen their ideas and understanding. My question though is, do you think that most of the experts you have mentioned are either childless or anyway they are leading men, and they have an unrealistic conception about what autonomy means when people have, say, young children, and feel that they must at least put their children on an equal level with all their other interests. So this is a kind of dialectic, isn't it, between interdependence, responsibility, and agency, and the fight for freedom. And I wonder if you'd like to comment on what critical realism might illuminate about this.
Maybe I could, this question reminds me a little bit of a saying I forgot from home that philosophy is always also a matter of autobiography. So I think you certainly have a point in saying that, well, if people do not have children, or they don't have a certain kind of responsibility, familial responsibility or obligations that might affect their idea of autonomy and freedom, if I understood you correctly.
I just want to make a brief comment, which is I agree with what Priscilla says, that I think at the heart of the dialogue is democracy. And for instance, the differences between representative democracy and participatory democracy. I think that Boal was very harsh on Aristotle, but then he had a more ambiguous relationship. But Boal also directed plays with the traditional way, right? So it's not that he introduced a method that is extremely important, right? That makes theater accessible to everybody, but at the same time, he didn't reject other approaches, right? It's true that if you immerse yourself in the theater of the oppressed, it's difficult to enjoy a tragedy and usually traditional theater because you think of all these problems that we see. But I think that he was not fanatical in rejecting everything that we have accomplished so far when it comes to philosophy or theater, but just opened another way. And of course, I want to say that participatory approaches can be co-opted, and they are co-opted, right? So they are not magic bullets as well.
Hi, thanks. I just want to echo Priscilla's comments around the presentations. The joy for me of going to a conference where the link is a meta theory is you hear so many different presentations where they use that meta theory in an effective way. So thank you for both the presentations. My specific question is around the issue of agency within your own presentation, because I'm wondering whether or not that discussion you had is over reliant on a rational choice version of agency that underplays both psychological and social factors. And the two examples I'd use were on the psychological level, as we know that recent studies of rape victims indicate that psychological response of fight, or flop, the flop had been underestimated. In fact, that at some point your body just gives up. You have no control over your body. You can't do anything about it. Your mind may be saying, I don't want this to happen, but your body is saying, play dead, play dead. You'll get away with, you will survive if you play dead. You have no rational control over that. And at a social level, again, I think, explanatory critique indicates this very well, that people can have false beliefs. And if we're acting in a war situation on the basis of false belief, and you don't know that's a false belief, how much individual agency you have, because you're not making a rational choice. So I just wanted to explore that a little bit if possible.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, I agree with you that many of the thinkers I've covered in the presentation do not take into account the biological aspect of things. And I am aware of all of those, kind of like new thinking that has to do with the, what do you call it, autonomous system, the neural circuit and so on. And I think that is certainly an angle that should be thought about more. I think about the false information issue, perhaps in some way this is hinted at or perhaps contemplated by the idea of self-witnessing. It goes a little bit back to the phenomenological transcendental reduction, what Husserl was saying and how he influenced Sartre, in the procedures of distancing and then annihilation, and think of yourself as nothing so that there be something. That is the kind of thing that the phenomenologists were kind of performing in their sort of reflective process. You know, how do we distinguish false information from true information? So in some respects, it is, I guess, perhaps hinted at, but I agree with you that it should be, you know, thought more about. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, just to echo, two fantastic presentations. Thank you. I'm sorry, it's another question for you, Kalok. Just picking up on your the quote that you shared at the end. If you knew me and you really knew yourself, you wouldn't have killed me, in the context of the genocide in Rwanda. I'm thinking in a sort of practical level that so much of conflict prevention, peace building work, genocide prevention work focuses on understanding the other. It seems that the bit that is completely missed is understanding ourselves, understanding oneself and the agency that we have. And I'm wondering if you've got any thoughts on how we sort of incorporate that side of things, because it really seems like that's the bit that's missing.
Thank you for this fantastic question, because this is something I have been thinking about also. I think maybe I could, we've got limited time, but there are two aspects to it. If you take the real meta-realist philosophy, there is the idea, of course, of the ground state, where understanding yourself is basically understanding the other, because, you know, the two are one. And it sounds very mystical, but if you go back to what Husserl said, about pre-reflective consciousness, which is a very interesting idea, that is that before we reflect on ourselves consciously, okay, we are already aware, and that is why he called it pre-reflective, that there is some people understand it as a kind of a pervasive sense of self-manifestation. And that has to do with his idea of intentionality. So he thinks that consciousness is always intentional, not in the sense of being purposeful, but intentional of being directed towards some phenomenon in the world. And because at the pre-reflective state, so we are not consciously thinking of ourselves, okay, doing something, but nonetheless, we have a certain pervasive sense of self underlying us, that there is an incredibly intricate link between that self that is manifesting, and also pre-reflective, and also the phenomena being observed. So who you are, basically, there is a certain mirror neurons, maybe in the cognitive science language. There is a certain parallel in terms of what we understand ourselves to be pre-reflectively, and the phenomena that we observe. So there is a certain parallel and a very close, intricate link between understanding ourselves and understanding the other. So that may be a more long-winded way of explaining or kind of elaborating what Bhaskar was saying, you know, sort of, you know, the self and the other are one. But, you know, that's my current understanding, you know. In a few years, it might differ, you know, might change, of course. Thank you. So we now hand over to the next hour.
Hello, everyone. I would like to presentation of my part of research. I work in Institute of Sociology, and we are going to recognize the security system and the main role of professional work in that security. And this is my conclusion for my research. That conference, it's very important for me because here we are, person, culture, and society. And the main tail of my research was why firefighters do this for us. Yes, it's important question for us. This is my agenda. I have a lot of text and slides, but we are going to talk about that concern. Okay. To begin with, let me share a bit of context of myself. I work in Institute of Sociology at the University of Wrocław, and we study field of the sociology of profession. My department, sociology of high-risk profession in security system. Since I was employed in the second department, my boss like research of profession of security. The main courses concerned of sociology of the army. This approach set my knowledge in my research that all perspective, but my boss he think about the sociology of these positional groups. That project is off now, but we are continue the study of the these professional workers. Why firefighters? Given the opportunity to choose my focus of research, I decided to study firefighters in Poland, who may serve either as a professional, as a volunteers. My first doctoral book was a long time ago, but we know that we have a lot of problem with contemporary threats. The firefighters are the person who secure us. Yes, that threats are it's a lot. Right now, when we are our conference, firefighters in Poland are fighting with flood in the part of our country. Each year we have out 500,000 intervention. That threats are that big. Okay, my first book, it was professional firefighters, and second book is about volunteer firefighters. They are in Polish language, yes, but it's what I did in sociology. A human individuals is essentially a being with a given constellation of concerns. With the various order of reality, we have natural, practical, and social. But I was really interested it finding the sources of this concern. My assumptions were right. I hope so. Another sociologist can approach this subject in a different way. Here is a link for my article in English. If you are interested how do this, you can open. It was a long-term project. All data was only traits if the activity. Each research layer offer a different perspective on reality. Literature, reviews, case study, interviews. After conducting the interviews, I realized that critical realism would become my research approach. From this perspective, I carried out conversation with Firefighters' alter ego, their wives, husbands, parents, siblings, and all people. The firefighters' ego expressed deep concern for them. They are afraid for firefighters, and this is a significant fear. Upon completing the qualitative research, I already had all material. I concluded this project, but I think about more steps for my research. That way, I do a survey questionnaire for firefighters volunteer in that last year. Critical realism offers ontology to explain the entities, but explain nothing. It gives you the opportunity to see more insightful in that we study, standing that we can be wrong. What's in the beginning? Tweets, of course, tweets about great strength. People often accept the risk of natural hazard and live next to them. So the effectiveness of volunteer fire brigade depends on many factors. I recognize them too. They are important to me as this while morphogenetic changes take place. Cultural conditions also play an important role in shaping the identity in the fire brigade as an institution. At the same time, such element creating a strongly normative framework that sustains the ethos of service across generations. Institutional structures exist and exert an influence on firefighters. Firefighters' institutions generate the particular kind of beliefs that ensure their reproduction across generations. There are fundamental conditions in a socio-cultural environment. We have some beliefs are not true altruism, heroism, and selfness. I think that is. What condition must exist for people to engage in voluntary firefighting activities? Where there are the threats, and people who organize to fight him. The decision to volunteer can be explained through personal concern and reflexivity, often rooted in experiences, a moral calling, or a strong sense of belonging. Thus, the volunteer fire service become both of personal and a social project, balancing structure, agency, and culture. In this context, false beliefs play an important role, such as altruism, heroism, and selflessness, reinforced by institutions to ensure their survival and transmission to future generations. Critical realism reminds us that subjectivity is dual in nature. In one side, actors and their action, and other structure, simply two sides of the same coin. False beliefs do not flow only from institution to individuals. Individuals themselves may so adopt them, for instance, belong that without the service, his life has no meaning. I do something with my AI agent, but I don't check it reflexivity. But maybe it's some true in the level of reflexivity. Why do they do this for us? Okay, but it's only curiosity. And we have my conclusion of my research. The slides illustrate what the sources of concern are. They shape the agentic subjectivity of volunteer firefighters in their everyday life, not only in his service. They are in everyday life. One layer is bigger than 3, but I think we have a very good called that concerns. We have this DDD, the process of deliberation, decision, and dedication. To refers to a reflexive mechanism in which an individual, through interior dialogue, make decision and commit to their realization. And the first levels concern that the mind authentic self-engagement. We have a natural order, of course. We have a social order. We have the traits. And we have people who, within this social order, face them. Someone has to do this. Firefighters have this deeply rooted concern who, if not them, they show authentic self-commitment, a long-term, transcendental commitment. In short, I am because you are. They are responsible for the safety of the local community and carry this burden on his shoulders. Community is not given at all. They know that, and they really want to help us. In the second level of this concern, we have care expressed through financial or material support. This concern reflects from a particular knowledge, knowing how and to whom help should be extended in response to pervasive need. One does not need to possess much in order to help. caring for another lack does not require abundance, but rather intentionally feeling to others. The third level, we have concern for the common good. We live here, this is our place of life, maybe less for our children because they will probably live somewhere there, but the concern of common good is clear. Is the way caring for the common good becomes both a moral and existential practice that reinforce the foundation on community resilience. And the last, fourth level, personal care for others arising from mindfulness. It was when I looking for that concern, I imagine what is this? I can't call this in Polish, but mindful activities. Where is that subjectivity of against the firefighters? They are really know what should I do and are that mindful for other people. And for the beginning, I think that my book is some kind of thank you for firefighters because they do great job and they sacrificed for us, but they give us a gift from security of us. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. While we are waiting for my presentation, hopefully we'll be here soon. I'll tell a few words about me. I'm Angela Popek. I'm based in Warsaw, capital of Poland, and I work as a lecturer and a researcher in SWPS University in the capital. My presentation is black, and I would like to ask if we can turn off the lights or shut down the windows, and I hope that you will be able to see the slides. Oh, thank you. We cannot turn the light. But they will not see anything. So it's better they hear me than they just see me and don't see anything. But they can hear me. Okay, I think I can continue, can I? Yeah. I would like to ask 5 minutes before the time ends. All right. I'm gonna present today the initial findings of the research projects that I lead. And first of all, I would like to stress that I'm quite new in critical realism. I just got to know about it several years ago and started to be interested. And as there are no one in my institution who are critical realists, so it's just all by myself that I'm just struggling to find out. And these kind of conferences are really helpful. So if you give any comments, how can I improve my analysis? That will be really good for me. Thanks. I will try go back. Can I? Off timer, it says. that's can I go back to the first slide? I'm not sure if I'm controlling that. Oh, yes, I do. So I'm going to talk about the friendship today. I'm sociologist of migration, and I'm deeply interested in sociology of childhood, particularly sociology of adolescence in these projects. But this particular paper that is in progress is on friendship as a social a kind of construct. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'll present the studies, the projects, and then talk a little bit about methodology, and I will present the initial findings. First of all, the first project where the data arrives is called the Structure and Agency Transnational and School Transitions of Ukrainian forced migrant adolescents in Poland. It's a 4-year project which started last year. So this summer we have just ended. I can't see the presentation on the screen, but it's okay. I'll look that way. We just ended collecting the data. It's a longitudinal study, what means that we conduct the qualitative interviews with adolescents, Ukrainian forced migrants, the parents and institutions all around education. They are both teachers, school staff, or for example, consulars, ministries, and so on, everything about education in Poland. So the data has been just collected and we are just starting to analyze it. And we focus in this study specifically on the last graders of the primary school. Primary school in Poland takes 8 years, and then children go to high school directly. And at the end of the primary school, children take the 8th graders exam, and based on that exam results, they are allocated to the ranked high school. So if your exam results are quite low because of something, it's probably that you will not get to a high-ranked high school. And for that reason, many migrant children automatically drop out or just get to the low-ranked schools because of their, for example, poor knowledge of Polish, which didn't let them to pass the exams on a proper level. That's just a short introduction. The other project is a year-long project, 12 months, which is called Empower. It's activating change, empowering youth civic engagement and forced migrants and internally displaced population in Poland and Ukraine. It's an international project. I lead the project in Poland, and we also do research in Ukrainian with internally displaced youth. What we are interested in their transitions, adaptation, but mostly in being actively participating in their local communities and trying to show their agency and making the change in their local communities. And the data also has been just collected and finished last month. So we are in a process of preparing the data analysis, and the Foundation for Polish Science funded that research project. So that's the aim. First one, we focus more on education, but that's a broad topic. When we study children, we look not only on their academic results, but very much on a social and political, educational structures, on the family structures, how the policies are made and realized that directly or indirectly affect young people. And as I mentioned in Empower project, we look at activism and we understand activism very broadly. I understand it as any action that helps young people to make change in their local communities. It can be either changes in their schools. For example, they decide to have pajama party and they struggle for that, discussing with their principal, or they make, for example, participate in the youth council in the city or in the country's youth council. I grounded primary in the critical realist perspective, because I'm very much interested in those 3 key domains. So what is empirical, actual, and real? And in this paper, I'm trying to, through the retroduction method, trying to get the real causes of making friendship as the social construct among forced migrant Ukrainian children in Poland. So we look at empirical, exactly what we gather during our empirical data, what we see about the actual, what actually happens, and we try to, through the communication, through the interviews with young people, parents and adults, other stakeholders, to understand what exactly happens there, why kind of children make friendships with these children and the others with others, or don't have friends at all, and then trying to find this kind of real causes. So what happens there behind all of that? The theoretical framework for this paper is quite broad because, first of all, there's in a paradigm of critical realism, as I mentioned. But then as a sociologist, I look deeply in the sociology of childhood, particularly sociology of youth and adolescence. And I look deeply in sociology of migration, not only the politics and policies, but all the construct that my sociology of migration can offer us, also integration of refugees in Poland, that has been a huge debate within the last 2 years, I would say. And I also look at sociology of friendship, where we understand friendship as embedded in social structures. I look closer to something that is called ethnic homophily among friendships. There are a lot of research based, particularly in Germany, with, for example, Turkish children who were making lots of ethnic homophilic groups, making friends among their ethnic or nationality groups. And then I came across something that is called friendship heterophilia, also opposed ethnic relations, is that when ethnicity doesn't really matter, nationality doesn't really matter, so other issues come more important, for example, personality, a kind of a person, and that was very important in our findings. Methodology briefly is that in the first project, EduMap, we are focused on education. And so we have longitudinal study, as I mentioned. We talk to children and the other stakeholders, adults, when they are in the 8th grades, and then we have asynchronous exchange with them. So we communicate with them. For example, they chat sometimes me telling that, oh, I got to the high school that I wanted, or for example, I dropped out and I have to repeat a year again. And then we will go back to them in a year next spring, and we'll talk to them when they are in the age of the first year of high school to see what happens to those children and families. We talk to the stakeholders, and I mentioned, and we have a quite interesting also research component, adolescents-led peer research. I also involved 6 young peers who are Ukrainian refugees, and they stay here in different cities in Poland. And we taught them how to do ethically and methodologically the study. So they, by themselves, recruited and done interviews with their peers with the same experience. Empower research project is a little bit different here. We have individual interviews with young people, know their parents. We don't talk to their parents, but we do talk to the institutions that support any kind of activism and active participating of young people. Those can be both schools and very often, for example, NGOs that offer volunteering possibilities for those children. And we do focus groups with young people to elaborate. It's more kind of workshop to elaborate guidelines how to make refugee and migrant youth be more active in your communities. All in all, we've conducted a little bit more than 200 interviews, so there is quite a amount of information ahead of us to analyze. So, and now, as I said, just in a way of introduction, I'll just work out some initial findings. Very briefly, where the research took place, make sure that I just marked red Szczecin, where we are, is on the right west over there just to show the reference where we are, but the rest of the cities, that's where we conducted the research in the capital, Purple, Warsaw, and then Katowice, Lublin on the eastern border, Rzeszów on the eastern border, and two smaller cities, smaller, I mean about 50,000 50,000 people population. It's Zamość and Przemyśl, because I was very much interested in how these territories that are close to Ukraine and very often are disputable in the history affect young people and their path. What we find out, lots of interesting things, but I've been in sociology of migration, sociology of childhood for quite a while, and previously I was working as a teacher in a primary school, so I could observe different patterns of making friends and different relations, and sometimes it's hard to be surprised even by a new project. But what struggled me and what made me surprised is just several issues. First of all, we found out there's something that I call exclusive ethnic homophily. So we have here ethnic homophily. It means Ukrainian adolescents who make friends with other Ukrainian adolescents, very often just refugees, not those who came earlier to Poland, and they in exclusive groups, rejecting by different reasons to make friends with other nationalities or other ethnic groups. Then we found out there's something that is spatial ethnic homophily, what we call spatial, depending on a space where children, where adolescents spend time, they make those friendships. For example, at school, they might have only Ukrainian friends, but for example, in the playground, in their neighborhood, they might have had different nationalities, either Polish friends or other nationalities that come across as well. So it depends on where they, but that's also visible in, for example, in different post-school activities, like sport activities, where children do have contact with other nationalities. Ethnic heterophily, that's when Ukrainian adolescents make friends with different nationalities, particularly with Polish peers. That's what we are mostly interested in about Polish peers, how these friendships are made. And then what I mentioned, post-ethnic friendship. Despite being forcibly displaced, that's how I also prefer to call them, living during a current war in their native country, often having a part of their family living back in Ukraine. So they live through the war on an everyday basis, because very often their fathers or brothers stay back in Ukraine, either fight or not. These children used to make friends with, for example, Russian children, Russian adolescents, or Belarus adolescents, claiming that nationality does not matter. So we just want to make friends. We feel connections, we are culturally close, or just will feel good with those people, despite living through different experiences. We also found out there is a kind of relational exclusion, or we call absence of friendships. Quite a big amount of children found themselves in a situation with no friends. That's been about 3 years when they left Ukraine. Probably if we talk to children who are about 15 years old now, so they left when they were 11, 12. So those friendships were just starting to make sense at the age of 11, 12. Particularly, we should remember that there were 2 years of COVID pandemic. So those children very often just went to school for a year, had 2 years online learning, and then war happened. So they didn't learn, they didn't manage to make meaningful friendship in Ukraine. So it means they lost most of the connections, and they haven't managed to make friendships in Poland, either, for different reasons. And there is a huge also debate that Ukrainian adolescents, particularly but Ukrainian children, face pressure or bullying or exclusion from Polish peers which is on a very much true, but it will be quite ignorant to think that all Ukrainian adolescents who came here are so open, friendly, and want to make friends here and want to study on the highest level, right? Those are different children who came because they were forced to leave their countries, and they had different kind of lives and friendships and educational levels, educational outcomes back in Ukraine, right? That's not only the best students who left Ukraine, so we don't have to expect them to be those here. And I started to be interested, well, we have those. Probably there are very good, thanks. Probably there are many more groups. This is just something that came across very particularly. We could observe it throughout all the cities. And then I started to think, well, what are the causes? Where's the reason? Okay, there's definitely in migration studies and in sociology of childhood, it's nothing new. So there is the individual reasons, right? It depends on the personality, on the character, on the needs. So I briefly divided these into three parts. Those three parts are not really categories, but rather parts, and they are not exclusionary, but rather mutually connecting and mutually influencing each other. And depending on which level we look at them, we can be referring them to different levels. So there's something that can be closely connected to the agency. It's individual, for example, socio-demographic factors like age, gender, family background, education level, both here and back in their own country. Psychological also issues like personality, coping mechanism, beliefs. But then we also can refer to the individual level here, to the agency, the migration, in the meaning that how migration affects those children, because the psychological behavior and state can be affected and is affected by the migration reasoning. And that's the reason of migration, very often a process of migration, particularly those children who were living in 2022 and who were, for example, under the occupation for several months, and then were trying to get out of occupation and then coming to Poland in post-migration experiences. Not all of them came directly to Poland. Some of them went to very often Germany, for example, and then they came closer, as they claim, came closer to Ukraine. And then we shouldn't also forget about that kind of structural level. So in structure, we can refer a lot, but I decided to pose two main, that's politics and policies. In this case, very much on migration and education. I don't think it's something new that Ukrainian refugees in Europe are under temporal protection, which is very different from the refugee status, and they can benefit the access to labor market, they can benefit to the healthcare system, and almost all the benefits as the natives in each country have. That's the same in Poland. So that depends how this migration policy is adopted. But meanwhile, it is temporary. What means is about each year, now it's each a year and a half, it's prolonged, what still poses a kind of feeling of discontinuous and temporality, where parents and children don't know whether they have to stay here, or they can stay here, whether they have to learn language, whether they can make friends, whether do they have to make friends, because, for example, last stay was prolonged by this September 2025, and now we know that European Commission adopted the new regulation that prolongs by spring 2026, so for half a year. That is just half a year extending time, and they never know if they will be forced to go back to Ukraine after staying here for 3 years. Education, definitely, there are also some special benefits. We can call them benefits because probably they are for Ukrainian refugee children. For example, in the 8th grader, which I've just mentioned at the beginning, 8th grader test, there are 3 subjects that all children have to take to pass that exam. So it's the Polish language, that's mathematics and foreign language. So since last year, Ukrainian refugee children, the forced migrant children, don't have to take Polish language. So they can also only rewrite the mark from their marks, from their grades, and then they have to take math and foreign language. And since that this year, among foreign language, which was very often English, rarely German or Spanish or French, they can also take, for example, Russian language. There is no still Ukrainian language among foreign language, but many are Russian speaking or second Russian speaking children, they take Russian. What automatically upgrades their probability of having higher grades on the final exam of the 8th graders. And then institutions, how institutions deal with that. How institutions, because there are a lot of disputes, and Polish peers can see these kind of preferences for Ukrainian children, but not for Ukrainian refugee children, but not for other Ukrainian children or other nationalities. Other nationalities can't take those benefits, and there is a kind of natural questions, why is it they are so special, and there is no dialogue. We don't see the dialogue between the structures, between the teachers and children explaining why. So it's just left for children to decide for themselves. And the last one, culture, which is so important in those making friendships. Just several issues that came across in the analysis is that identity and sense of belonging. Despite claiming by just few children they feel well here, no one marked they feel belonging in Poland, no one. So it's still quite short time, still living during the war on everyday basis, still living in a temporality. It also prevents them from making social connections in Poland. Norms and socialization, and also here language communication styles also could be withdrawn with that one. That's about many people say Polish and Ukrainian cultures are Slavic, so are similar, but that's a misprediction. That's a stereotype that prevents people from integrating well, because contemporary societies are so much different, and that we can see, for example, differences in communicating, differences in making friends, differences in social contacts, differences in spending free time. So Ukrainians are much more open in their nature, used to having lots of friends and spending much of free time outside, going out, cafes, parks, while Polish contemporary society is rather becoming more Western European, closely family-based, and randomly meeting their friends, on occasionally meeting their friends, which makes a contradiction. For example, they're claiming very often, oh, there are so many Ukrainians here because we can hear Ukrainian everywhere. Yeah, that's because of different reasons. First, they like spending time together outside, what makes them a bit louder. If there are 10 people, so it makes louder. And the second is also because, for example, because of the housing conditions. Very often there are several people, several families living in one room. So they better go outside spending time instead of staying just in one room, 10 people for the whole day. And so on and so forth. Cultural misperceptions and stereotypes. As before 22, there were quite a few Ukrainians, about 1 million Ukrainians, but those were labor migrants. So it's still the stereotype of a Ukrainian means labor, migrant means blue collar, means something on the lower level of employment. And within the war, there are many Ukrainian families who came here with the middle class or even higher economic status, which made a crash in the understanding and perceiving. So because Ukrainians were perceived as the poor labor migrants who came to work for Polish companies, and now the expensive cars, the expensive clothing companies can be visible. What makes the misunderstanding within the society. And a huge issue of history about territory disputes, about Volyn, which was for some time Ukrainian territory, then Polish territory, then Ukrainian territory. And that's a quite of very sensitive topic, which is not spoken loud, but very much used by the politicians, particularly before the elections, to make the society incoherent. I will stop here. There are several, because I don't have time, do I? I don't. Yeah. For discussion. Yeah. So just the quotes that I don't want to take time to read. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I think I would like to ask two questions for Angela. The one is critical realism has a very good theory of interdisciplinarity, of how groups of researchers can work together that come from different disciplines. And I understand that this is a project, a research project, in which there are other members. You're working with people. So the question I want to ask, the first is, how critical realism can work in an interdisciplinary setting, if this is just you being interested in critical realism or other members of the team are also interested. And the second question is, if we don't see critical realism as a chewing gum that is for everybody, every context, every occasion, and that it's a project of self-critique, right? I was wondering whether you have any insights on whether you feel that aspects of the critical realist ontology do not work in the specific setting, or if there are things that do not make any sense, or that you have, based on your research, that you have some ideas for a vision of the critical realist ontology. So the one is about interdisciplinarity, and the second is about revision.
Thanks a lot. Yes, that's a hard question because in the first 4-year project, there's me and I have a PhD student and a postdoc. So there are 4 of us. None of them is critical realist. So I myself trying to figure out and see how it might favor, how it might help me. And the others just trying to follow me and get more information. So I'm just trying to, I don't have to convince them. That's the issue. I don't have to convince them because they see the value, but they don't know how to use it. They don't know. Many people expect that critical realism will give them, like, for example, my PhD student is like constantly asking me, well, give me the tool how to analyze. And like, critical realism doesn't give you the methodological tool. It can help you to build your tool based on some issues. So that's hard because people just are waiting for, like, in quantitative study, you have a tool, you have to calculate, and then it doesn't work that way. And in the other international project, yeah, we have Ukrainian and Polish team. There are 6 people in it. None of them, again, is critical realist, but we all from different backgrounds. What make me think that is a kind of benefit, it's a huge benefit for my project because I can hear different voices, something that I haven't heard. And I'm not sure about you, but I came to critical realism along with the transition and changes in my personal life. So it's something that is that re-evaluate, that I started re-evaluating in my personal life, thinking about my personal life, that also comes along with critical realism itself. And yeah, so there's much work to be done on that side. And the second question you asked about
If based on your empirical research, you see that aspects of the critical realist meta theory do not work in the Polish or Ukrainian context, and you feel that you would like to revise some aspects of it.
I know I haven't found those, because I take it rather like as a philosophy and as a guidelines to look at specific and not as the strict regulation or tool. So it helps me to understand other issues, but I'm still in a transition from the interpretative paradigm and constructivism. So I know how to do those. So I'm just learning, and we will see whether I can contribute anything or not. But so far, I haven't come across anything that prevents me. I don't think that critical realism, just if you treat it as a philosophy, that can do that.
Thank you. My question's for, I'm sorry, is it Małgorzata? Thank you. I'm just curious, the findings from your study, I'm wondering how specific they are to volunteer firefighters, and how generic they are to groups that also do other kinds of activities for the common good, and also whether the firefighters do other things that are for the common good as well as the volunteer firefighting. Yeah, your findings, are they specific just to volunteer firefighters, or can they be, do you think they can be applied to other groups?
Yes. Okay, I research only firefighters, but in my work at university, we try to research paramedic, and it was a problem because they are very busy in her life. He work sometimes of to full-time job. What can I say? The questionnaire was the same, but it's not the same conclusion about that group of people. I think that idea of measurement of activity for other people is for all. It's for us, it's for all people in the world. It's my thinking about how to measure that activity to others.
We have online question, Priscilla.
Hello, thank you. Once again, I was just so impressed with these two lectures. Thank you. It's lovely to hear critical realism being applied to such valuable research. And as a sociologist, I so much appreciate the depth that you have gone into the social world, and you've used deep critical realism to underlabour and to extend your understanding of the important people that you've worked with. Also, I'm so glad to see that you were working with such big samples, and you took so much time. It's so worthwhile. My one question is that I once researched in a school that was said to be the most inclusive school in the UK. There were many disabled children there, all range of ability, all kinds of children from many nationalities in this London school. And the main theme of the school was inclusion, so that everybody was gathered together into the community, so that the children had meetings when there was a social problem like bullying or something to sort it out. And they had schemes like bully busters and guardian angels who would run to the rescue of the children who had problems. And so, in a way, a psychiatrist working in a prison hospital with the most dangerous prisoners said that she thought schools should be about social relationships, or what are they for? And this curriculum, all about academia, ignores the unseen curriculum where the schools, whether they intend to or not, promote certain kinds of behaviour, bad, divisive, unhappy behaviour, or community, solidarity, understanding, kindness, which is so valued, talked about, and practiced and encouraged in so many practical ways. But most schools ignore this, don't they? And I just wondered if the Ukrainian children attended schools with different levels of concern about inclusion and community, and whether you were able to research that.
Yeah, thanks for a question. That's a huge question. Has a lot of elements in it. Yeah, that's about inclusion in a school. We struggle for that as the scientists, as the practitioners. There is really little inclusion we find in Polish schools because the majority of those who are not normal are either in the special classes or in a special schools, for example, special school for disabled people and so on. And because there was just a small share of migrant children before 2022 in Polish schools, so school is just starting to change, and I hope being more open for otherness, for diversity, what we call for diversity, because that's what you said, Priscilla, and that's what I'm also concerned of. If the school, if the system, particularly pedagogues, teachers, are ready for different needs, it doesn't matter whether it's a migration, disability, or any other kind of social in favored construct of family and so on, children without parents. School then can deal with the issue, just figuring out the issue. But if the school in general is not ready, then it is hard. So we in Poland on the policy level, it's very loudly said that Ukrainian refugee children are included. But what is meant is educationally included. So there are some favorable measures to measure their outcomes, to be included in the classes, but there is no social inclusion at all. There is nothing done about social inclusion, and that's where lots of work should be done on that.
Lee, are you still online? Lee, can you hear me, I wonder? Hi. Can I ask you a question, Lee? Or have... Oh, hi. I've been thinking about you for the past 2 days, Lee, because okay, I bet we'll be cut off in a minute, but just to ask you, with your experience as the editor, do you think there's quite a sort of tension between the people who want to drag critical realism into philosophy and the ones who want to use it in the social, and that the social is discouraged by some groups, or I can't hear you. No. Oh, well, shall I leave the question with you? But if you've got time to. Yeah. Okay, bye.